Hello and welcome to another episode of CollectaThoughts, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games, and today we're going to be talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Millennium Duels, a PS3, Xbox 360 game that came out at the tail end of the generation in 2013, and it was a game that I actually bought around the time it came out, not so much because I was looking forward to it, but because this was back when I was still a teenager and I bought those, PSN money cards. And you could never buy, the exact money you needed, so you'd always have to buy a little bit more. And then, it was one of those situations where I just had enough to buy this game, and so I ended up spending my extra money on that. And then I played it, and then I didn't play it for now almost 9 years. And the reason for that is because, and I'm not gonna lie, this game is not structured very well. This was definitely a problem with Yu-Gi-Oh games during that generation on main consoles. I do think that the handheld versions of these games, not this game specifically, but things like Tag Force or World Championship, did fare a lot better. But the console ones, not so much. The big problem for me is the acquiring of cards. One of the things these games have going for them is that they're not really pay to win, as in you can pretty much get any card in the game just by playing, but the way you acquire cards does feel very slow and monotonous and very, very grindy. So what ends up happening is, as you pass through the levels, and levels here being simply playing against different duelists in a linear way, what ends up happening is, you don't acquire enough cards to make a decent deck, and the NPC just ends up becoming a lot to handle at some point. So I guess the idea here would be to play, the same duel a bunch of times and just hope you get better cards to make a better deck, which is insanely boring in my opinion. And with each duel you're just getting a set of random cards from that specific duelist you're playing against, which sounds like a good thing because then you could focus on a specific character to get the specific cards you want, but it doesn't work quite like that. I think the major issue is that, well, while you get cards specific to a character, you for the most part get cards from a general pool, which can feel very random, and trying to build anything out of that is quite annoying. The other issue is, even if you were only getting specific cards to a certain character, the game still progresses in a linear way. So if you wanted to get, for example, XYZ cards, you'd be waiting quite a long time because you'd have to reach the XYZ area first. The way games like Tag Force get around this problem is, of course, well, you can just go and travel the world and fight whatever duelists you want. But also, instead of getting cards, you primarily get money to spend on packs, which allow you to be a lot more selective with what you get, saving on a lot of the grinding. But that simply does not exist here, and that's why it took me so long to beat this game, because, well, after a while I just kinda gave up. I didn't want to build a deck with the cards I was given, and I couldn't really be bothered to grind for new ones, because that entailed playing with those cards I was already not a big fan of. So here we are, almost a decade later, to finish, the mistakes of my past, or something like that. And I'll be honest, I didn't bother grinding either. What I ended up doing was something I read online, which was you can just buy DLC for this game and you'll get structure decks and other packs of cards that are infinitely more useful than whatever you could grind for. It is literally an easy pass because a lot of these cards are already in the game as well. It's just really saving you from that grind. And criticize me all you want, but after I did that, I did enjoy this game a lot more. Suddenly, I was having fun playing with different structure decks and, just having a lot more flexibility to play with rather than having a single really bad deck. That being said, even with that issue fixed, this is by far not the most enjoyable Yu-Gi-Oh game. It is quite slow compared to other Yu-Gi-Oh games nowadays, like Master Duel, or even the more single player focused ones like Link Evolutions. And the game sometimes actually slows down, which is honestly incredible. I never even seen the PSP games do that. And there's not like a lot of animations, it's really a very basic board, very basic backgrounds. I don't know why this game is so sluggish, besides maybe, it being kind of shovelware that just kind of got shoved on the PlayStation Store and Xbox 360. But even beyond that, I think the major thing for me that makes this game feel like what I just said, shovelware, is the way it's also presented and the way it plays out. Basically, the idea here is that you're going through the entire series of Yu-Gi-Oh! Up until that point, but it really isn't. You're just doing a bunch of random duels in a random order, or I should say a tournament order, where you fight these characters in a certain order and then you get to a boss fight where instead of being a best of one, suddenly it's a best of three. Which is fine, that format is fine, but these duels really kinda do end up showing how lazy the game is in terms of its presentation. And by that I mean, there's really no story, it's very shoved in. Saying this game has a story is kinda like saying that the VR missions from Metal Gear Solid are their own story. And then the other thing adding to that disappointment is also just the characters' decks. Very often they're not really reminiscent of their characters at all, especially the just regular mundane characters. And I don't mean so much in, they add modern cards, that I don't mind. There's other Yu-Gi-Oh games that do that and I quite enjoy them. This one just legitimately feels very bland. Their decks just feel like they're, random decks that they added to a character and you're supposed to believe that's the deck they would play with on the show, and I just don't think it really works out. For example, Link Evolutions is a game that is kind of in a similar predicament. They add newer cards to, these older decks because, the game is different now. But in that game, it still very much feels like you're playing against those older decks and the essence of them still feels familiar, while here it's more like they're unrecognizable even though they still have some of the more well-known cards in them. For each specific character, I mean. It's a level of maybe laziness, maybe going too far, that makes me once again think this is a very rushed and kind of thrown together video game. And for those reasons, and because I don't want to make this review very long, because it's really not something worth putting too much thought into, I'll be honest, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Millennium Duels is getting a 4 out of 10. As a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, sure, it works, there's nothing incredibly wrong with it besides the odd slowdowns once in a while, but it's really not the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Game by a long mile, and it's most definitely not something you should be bothering with in 2022 like I did. At least now I feel like I've put to rest those $10 I spent almost 10 years ago. This is so stupid. I don't recommend playing it. Even if you're looking for a more story or play through the anime experience, this is not it. I'm gonna be reviewing a game soon that I think fits that much better. It's Link Evolutions, the first one, and hopefully you'll watch that review and that game will be a lot better for what you're looking for if single player Yu-Gi-Oh! Is something you're looking for, once again. Regardless of any of that though, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking and commenting all the things you can do for free here on YouTube. Now you can also dislike, that's fine. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and remember not to spend money on shovelware like I did. Goodbye.